and gentlemen, that's the end of the opening. We are now coming to the keynote session to address how to preserve and sustainably manage biodiversity and guarantee ecological security. The keynote will be delivered by highly esteemed speakers and chaired by Mr. Arab Hobala, Senior Sustainability Expert, former Chief for Sustainable Consumption and Production of UNEP. Arab, you have the floor.
Do you get me?
Yes.
Here. Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very well. Sorry, because I had a lot of technical problems. I had to change a lot of devices. I just moved into my apartment today. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think the first session has taken a little bit longer, so we have to be as much as possible stricter in the time. We have a very interesting set of people for this keynote speech, but let me first say just a few words on which are linked to the overall title of the Global Forum and also to our session. Resilient Cities, Healthy Planet, Preserving and Sustainably Managing Biodiversity and Guaranteeing Ecological Security. One thing that comes to my mind is that pandemic today, we need to all understand it, that it is just a result of our current unsustainable consumption and production patterns. If we don't understand that properly, I think most of our action will not lead us to a solution. This is the first thing. Our irresponsible behavior and I would say the irresponsible attitude of our leaders and different stakeholders. Too little has been done in resource efficiency. Too little has been done in climate mitigation. Too little has been done in preserving natural resources. And that's are all the elements that you have now here on the title. Most people talk about build back better. If you allow me, I don't think this is the right way to do it. It is just we need to build forward well and better. We need to draw lessons from our mistakes and understand how to build on a systemic and responsible manner under an adequate governance system. And that brings us to the right level of doing things, which are cities. This is the right place to deliver sustainability, but cities that are not resource efficient and resilient from an urban metabolism perspective will not be able to deliver this sustainability. Therefore, the country cannot do it. So a healthy planet is necessary for healthy cities, for resilient cities, and despite the multitude good policies and actions, and it has been raised already, we are not scaling up and speeding up implementation as we need, and it's getting extremely urgent so as to effectively deliver this transformation that is required, and this is on the top of the title. Many references to climate change and to biodiversity in the previous speeches. And that's what will bring us to the first speaker, which now has a huge responsibility in terms of climate change and climate mitigation, and ahead of the next COP. We will all expect that there will be actions taken that will be much more impactful than it has been done so far. So I will ask first Mrs. Patricia Espinosa, Executive Secretary of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to take the floor and as much as possible respect the time. Mrs. Espinosa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very pleased to join you this morning to offer a few words of welcome to this critically important forum. I would like to congratulate our host for 15 years of providing a platform for high-level dialogue on the building of sustainable cities and human settlements. We are meeting at a critical time in human history, a time that has echoes from our past. A century ago, the First World War and a global flu pandemic brought death and destruction to countless millions the world over. Today, 100+ years later, we find ourselves at a similar crossroads. We have a global pandemic that has already infected millions, and while the climate change crisis... Can I go on? Yeah. We have a global pandemic that has already infected millions, and while the climate change crisis we are currently dealing with may not be in the same category as a military conflict, if we lose the battle to bring it under control, we know there will be an extremely negative outcome for countless millions. We are not powerless in the face of those challenges. We can head off disaster, but it will require clear thinking, great determination, and courage on the part of all stakeholders to do the right thing. As the UN Secretary General Guterres put it recently, and I quote, "We have a choice, business as usual, leading to further calamity, or we can use the recovery from COVID-19 to provide a real opportunity to put the world on a sustainable path." I couldn't agree more, but I would also add this. As nations rush to respond to the immediate crisis of COVID, they must recognize that the impacts of climate change also demand an urgent response. The climate crisis isn't some pending disaster waiting to happen. It is on our doorsteps right now. If we look at last year alone, catastrophic fires and storms coupled with unprecedented temperatures cost the world $150 billion. Clearly, much work remains to be done to bring climate change under control. Nowhere is the work more important than in our urban centers. This is where the climate battle must be won. It is not hard to understand why. The statistics and trends lines are telling. By 2050, nearly 7 of 10 people in the world will live in cities. With up to 80% of global GDP generated in urban centers, there is no doubt they are the engines of economic prosperity. But those same centers are also significant drivers of climate change. Some of the communities most vulnerable to climate change are the urban poor. Frequently, they are people living in areas with a high risk of flooding, landslides, and sea level rise. Their communities often have limited means to withstand such extreme climate conditions. It is perhaps not surprising then that a recent World Bank report stated that internal climate migrants are rapidly becoming the human face of climate change. By 2050, in just 3 regions, climate change could force more than 143 million people to move within their own countries. This migration will then accelerate unless there are significant cuts in greenhouse gas emissions and robust development action. Rising to the challenge, cities and local governments around the world have made climate commitments at home and abroad through global campaigns such as those launched by ICLEI, United Cities for Local Governments, the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, the Making Cities Resilient campaign, and most recently through the new Compact of Majors. In short, cities and like-minded organizations are taking action to build up the strength of urban centers. And progress is being made in areas such as land use planning, building resilient infrastructure, enhancing early warning systems, strengthening governance for resilience, and improving the living conditions of the poor. But city, regional, and national governments can't do it alone. We have long recognized the need for businesses and other non-state actors to join with governments to fulfill the Paris Agreement and achieve a 1.5-degree future. This is a key part of what we call inclusive multilateralism. The unique expertise of the private sector can form an important part of the multi-sectoral partnership that is required between government and non-government actors. We see this, for example, in the private sector's initiative of the Nairobi Work Programme, which aims to kickstart private sector engagement in climate change adaptation efforts. It provides a platform for the private sector to showcase and exchange best practices and experiences with respect to their adaptation efforts, as well as in the most vulnerable countries and communities around the world. We see it in our Race to Zero initiatives, which seeks to rally leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, and investors for a zero carbon recovery that creates jobs and promotes sustainable growth. We also recognize the role of inclusive multilateralism when it comes to helping cities and communities around the world make the energy transformation we so urgently need. When I addressed ICLEI just a few days ago, I acknowledged the challenges of going green, but suggested they were not unsurmountable. It would require investments that enable the scaling up of the number and efficiency of renewables. That in turn will require innovation in building flexible power grids, energy storage, green hydrogen, and many other clean energy technologies and enabling infrastructures. I am confident that we can do this, and if we do, the payoffs in job creation could be huge. An energy system fit for the 21st century would not just result in decarbonization, but could also push jobs in the renewable sector to 42 million by 2050. However, we must ensure the transformation to a more renewable future is a just transition. It must be a process that helps those working in high emission sector get the training they need to make the transition to new jobs, mastering new technologies in a greener, cleaner energy sector. Domestically, this must be driven by national, state, and local governments. Internationally, it means making climate decisions that improve the lives of everyone, not just a favored nations. And this means fulfilling commitments under the Paris Agreement, including areas related to finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. Boosting ambition, building a more resilient future, and providing a just transition from fossil to green, those are the three key elements we need to build a cleaner, greener, and healthier future. But that's not all we need. We also need strong national adaptation plans to back up this work. The good news is that under the Paris Agreement, approximately 2/3 of all countries have urban content in their nationally determined contributions. Of these, 113 out of 164 countries have focused on adaptation in human settlements. Translating these commitments to national plans and strategies is crucial in the coming years. It's why we need to see even stronger commitments reflected in the next round of NDCs due in 2020. Dear friends, working with non-state actors to build a framework for more meaningful engagement in order to drive more robust climate action is essential. We have the roadmap to get there. The Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda give the world a solid blueprint for building forward. I fully agree with you, Arab, that we should not talk about building back, but building forward. I know that with determination, we can get there together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Espinosa. And allow me just to highlight a point that is, I would say, close to my heart. You said that we need to involve much more and much more efficiently the non-state actors, because for decades, all the discussion around climate change has been done by government representatives in UN and elsewhere, and on the side, we had the business and the cities. You referred a lot to the inclusive multilateralism, or I would call it also the inclusive multi-stakeholder work. As you know, the cities that are visible are mostly big cities. The companies that are visible are mostly big companies. While if we want to deliver climate mitigation and sustainability, it relies much more on the small and medium cities as much as on the small and medium enterprises. How far can we really consider properly integrating those small and medium cities and small and medium enterprises and associate them in this inclusive multilateralism so as to effectively deliver climate mitigation and adaptation?
Well, we have been working really a lot on this. Of course, it's always a challenge, you know, that we manage to bring out the messages that are coming out of the work that we are doing. We have, in the context of our conferences, we have a few very important activities, and it's not that few, but it's part of the program that has been built under the Marrakesh Partnership. The Marrakesh Partnership that was launched after the Paris Agreement. It was launched actually in Marrakesh, and this is why it is called Marrakesh Partnership. And for the Marrakesh Partnership, there are 8 specific areas that are given attention during the 2 weeks of the conference. And one of them, of course, has to do also with cities and subnational governments. So it has been a long way, it is absolutely true, but I think the evidence now that national governments alone cannot do this job, that the amount and the size, the breadth, the complexity of the challenge that climate change is posing to the world require really everybody on board. And that means that we really need to build those avenues of collaboration and cooperation. And the UN is really providing just the bigger framework. And under that framework, at the national, local, and community level, the action needs to happen. And we need to become a platform where people can come together to learn from each other. We need to become a platform where we can facilitate solutions to those communities where the actual transformation needs to take place.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we can go on for hours, but we don't have the time for that. So from climate change, which is the major challenge that we have today, and everybody is worried about that, it's affecting natural resources. So I'm moving to the next speaker now. We're moving to the conservation of nature, the natural resources that are very much impacted by the negative reaction of climate change, climate mitigation. And if we don't preserve properly the resources, the cities will suffer most from climate and from depletion of resources that we cannot use properly. So can I ask Mr. Zhang Zhisheng, President of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, to join us? Thank you very much, Mrs. Espinosa.
Thank you very much, moderator, Mr. Arab Hura, and I also appreciate very much the former keynote speaker, Madam Patricia Episona. Okay, it's my really good pleasure, Your Excellencies, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's really my honor to address you today as the President of the International Union of the Conservation of the Nature. This is the world's, as you know, largest and most diverse environmental network. The unsettling event of the 2020 have imbued the 5th annual session of the Global Forum on Human Settlement with highlighted significances. I really congratulate for these very timely and very important conferences. This is one for humanity stands at a crossroad, looking into the eye of a perfect storm. The economic, humanitarian, and social fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic could end up making the 2008 to 2009 global financial crisis look just like a very small one. As always, the poor, informal, marginalized communities will be the most adversely affected, unfortunately. In the midst of this crisis, many cities that we had come to know as the centers of the power, the influences, as a beacon of civilization, or simply as a smart, have revealed themselves to be vulnerable, inoperable, impudent, and in some cases, wholly unfit for the future. Urban people who might once have taken food, water, and energy for granted are now accurately aware of how easily supply chain can be stemmed and stimulated. COVID-19 has rattled our cities and changed the way we view them. I hope it will change the way we design, build, and manage cities in the future too. As the public budgets are redesigned and the stimulus package deployed, it is imperative, obviously, that we seize this once-in-a-generation opportunity to expedite the great green transition and build a better world for all. We can no longer ignore nature's warning shot. The Ebola virus is named after a river in Congo Basin. The namesake of the Zika virus is a forest in Uganda. COVID-19 is not the first zoonotic disease, though thought to have been triggered by ecological disturbance and wildlife exploitation. Nor will it be the last, at least not if we continue grinding against the wilderness. 3/4 of the planet's land surface has been significantly altered, and 1 million species of the plants and animals are thought to be at risk of extinction. Population of wildlife has declined by 68% since 1970. And of the 20 international biodiversity targets agreed by government at a decade ago, none has been met in full. Despite a lockdown rule earlier in the year, global greenhouse gas emission has resumed their dizzying ascent, capping a decade of scorching temperature. 2020 is on course to become the hottest year on record. The world is warning ice sheets are shrinking. Glaciers are retreating, and methane is bubbling through the permafrost. Oceans are acidifying. Sea level is rising. Wildlife are raging, and the extreme weather events are now all too familiar. The evidence is crystal clear, ladies and gentlemen. Our planet is in trouble, and therefore we are in trouble too. Cities are really matters. We have long known that cities are central to the success of Sustainable Development Goals. Despite occupying just a tiny fraction of the Earth's land surface, say about 2 or 3%, they account for the lion's share of the nature resources consumption, say roughly 75%, and contribute disproportionately to the global greenhouse gas emission, another 75%. For over half of the humanities, they are also home. At IUCN, we recognize that the survival of the nature world depends on the sustainability of the cities. We are mobilizing our union to help shape our collective urban future. At the behest of our members, we have formed the Urban Alliance to advance the sustainable city agenda. We are developing new tools and knowledge products such as IUCN Urban Nature Index to help cities reduce their ecological footprints and become nature positive. How to become nature positive? By protecting critical ecosystem from conversion to human settlements. By promoting compact development that minimize sprawl, the urban sprawl. By adopting nature-inclusive design. And also, how? By enhancing the performance of urban utilities to minimize waste and pollution. By greening procurement to ensure that embodied impacts are minimized. And also, last but not least, by adopting nature-based solutions to address pressing urban challenges. So now I'm like to talking about IUCN now promote nature-based solution, which has been adopted by UN in the last summit of the UN, New York. These efforts are intended not only to conserve nature, but to help communities prosper. In recent years, IUCN's work to popularize the concept of nature-based solution defined as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore nature or modified ecosystem that address societal challenges effectively, adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. In July 2020, we launched the IUCN Global Standards for Nature-Based Solutions, the result of a long consultative process involving 800 experts. The global standards is intended to bring clarity, credibility, and quality assurance to this concept. Examples from around the world attest that nature-based solutions can cost-effectively enhance sustainability, resilience, and livability of cities. Trees mop up pollutants, dampen noise, and cool the air. Wetland and rain garden reduce the flood risk. The mangroves and the marshes buffers storms. Green spaces facilitates exercise, spiritual nourishment, and community interaction. And the greenways support active travel. Yet, in most cities, the provision of nature is inadequate or distributed unevenly. Along lines of affluence, stark inequality persists. Far too many people are denied nature's benefits. We can and must do better. Green recovery with nature and the people at its heart. COVID-19 has taught us that business as usual is no longer an option. An investment in the health of a planet is an investment in our own future. Decisions made now on the stimulus measures will determine the health, the well-being, and the security of the future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, I firmly believe that this public health crisis can mark a turning point in human history, a chance to reset our relationship with the nature, to bring our economies with planetary boundaries, to reimagine our cities, to build a truly ecological civilization in the future of this 21st century. Thank you.
Mr. Zhang Xisheng, thank you very much. Thank you for highlighting the work that IUCN is doing, well-renowned, excellent work. You referred extensively to the need for nature-based solutions, which we all wish, but we know how limited these are implemented. You referred also to the pandemic, and you started by referring to the various diseases that came in until we get to the COVID-19 now, which most of them, if not all of them, emerge somewhere from nature. Nature that has been not preserved, nature that has been not sustainably managed, biodiversity that has been mainly destroyed. So how optimistic are you that human being will really understand, because COVID will pass. In a year time, people will go back business as usual. They will keep on destroying, consuming, and so. So what measures can we really take from your perspective, from IUCN perspective, to have a real wake-up call for government and citizens that we don't have time, time is running out, otherwise we will get to the breaking point?
Thank you so much, Arab, and you ask a very critical question. This question is also, constantly ponders me. And I think that no matter IUCN or UNFCCC or CBD, right, all the mayors, the citizens, we are all in this one planet, right? We have a whole shared community of the destiny of the future, right? But unfortunately, even though it takes 35 years, Arab, you know that, since IUCN together with the WWF and UNEP in 1980 proposed this concept and strategy of sustainable development, it takes 12 years for the first real conference, right? Come up with the 3 conventions. It takes 35 years. Finally, all the leaders gathering in New York in the summit, right, agree with the resolution of the 2030 agenda of the Sustainable Development Goal, even though 15 years ago in the UN is still decision of MDG, still stress only the development. Now, human beings accept we have to have SDG, sustainable development. It means not only shift the paradigm of the development, it also need to change the value. It also needs the global with the multilateralism, get together, work together to knowing that, right? So that is why, I quite appreciate your question, how to awaken. We cannot be a frog in a boiling warm water, right? And also politicians cannot just pass the bucks, only worry about the 4 years of their ballot, of their election, right? So conservation of the nature, without us. The health nature, health people. Now nature punishing us, right? So this is, as I said, that this is a wonderful opportunity for us to work together, like this conference, like UN's recently, conference. We get together. We really recognize we must implement SDG 2030 agenda. We must, really put in action for Paris Accord, for climate change. Now there is another hope. That is to say, next year, IUCN will hold in Marseille, France, over 10,000 people of the Global Nature Conservation Conference. And after that, CBD will hold in Kunming, China, to handle with the biodiversity and the degradation of the ecosystem of the earth. So let's work together, okay? So that we really solve this nature suffering from 2 crises. One is a climate crisis, another is a biodiversity and ecosystem crisis. So I think that it is high time we really work together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Come and share responsibility. Thank you, Professor Zhang. Let us move now to the 3rd speaker, the Director General of WWF International, Marco Lambertini. Marco, good afternoon, good morning, and pleased to meet you again. If you recall, we have been a couple of times together. Marco.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity. Really appreciate it. If we are to build back better or build for better, as Patricia's mentioned earlier, we need to embrace business unusual. And first of all, let's recognize the times we are living in. Previous speakers has mentioned the fact that we have a dominant species on the planet have now the ability to influence profoundly the state of our home. Some scientists call this age the age of humans, the Anthropocene. And you may argue that it's not all bad. We definitely, if you look at the evidence in terms of human development, we definitely achieved a lot of positive progress. Despite the tragic endemic inequality that continue to pervade our society, if you look at parameters like number of people in extreme poverty, or child birth rate mortality, or life expectancy, all these are indicators that has progressed a lot in the last, frankly, less than a century, perhaps even last 50 years in particular. And that's something that obviously we have to celebrate. But there is, as Professor Jan mentioned, there is, if you like, a dark side to our current development model. A dark side which is related to the fact that most of our development has come until now at the expenses of the natural world. I don't need to list again the science, the evidence of the state of the planet, the degradation of the planet. Science has never been clearer, evidence has never been greater. We are destabilizing climate and losing nature and biodiversity at a frightening, unprecedented, and dangerous rate. We're beginning to see things we've never seen before. In the last 25 years, we have seen water temperatures in the ocean becoming so hot, able to wipe out species that have been around for hundreds of millions of years, adapted to those high tropical waters. And now the waters are too hot even for them. And we're beginning to understand that actually there are entire ecosystems, from the ice sheets on the Arctic and the Antarctic, from the coral reefs around the tropics, or the Amazon forest and other large forest blocks, on the edge of tipping points, on the edge of changing state permanently. And that will have an impact on a number of biophysical systems, particularly related to weather and climate, like the jet stream or the Gulf Stream in the Atlantic, monsoons in Asia, that will be having incredible impact, not just on the ecosystem as a whole, but actually on our own economy. And that's exactly the good news in all this relatively bad news of today. First of all, we know exactly the seriousness of the issue. As is mentioned before, and I want to highlight this, we understand finally that the ecological challenge of today is twofold. It is climate change and crisis, and it is loss of nature. And we understand these two are not to be treated in isolation. These are interconnected, and we cannot solve one without the other. And right now, we need to break the negative loop where climate change is affecting nature loss, and nature loss is exacerbating climate change. Most excitingly, I think, and that's probably what makes me more optimistic than anything else about the future, is that we're beginning to understand. We're beginning to understand not just the fact that we are failing our moral duty to coexist with nature as dominant species on the planet, but actually we're beginning to understand the consequences of all this on us, on our well-being, on our future. We're beginning, first of all, to understand that nature loss and climate change are a business risk and a business cost today. So much the economy is depending on stability of the climate and a number of goods and services that nature provides to us for free every day. And this is a fundamental point for us, for me, because it is about stopping to take for granted those services and those goods that nature provides to us. This is, if you like, perhaps the most important step in the change process, in the transition that as a society we need to embark in. Understand that actually nature is the foundation of our economic and social development. And understand that we must rebalance our broken relationship with the planet. COVID is probably one of the many manifestations, a tragic one, a very acute one, manifestation of our unbalanced relationship with the planet, where we are non-considering enough the consequences of our impact on natural systems. But coming to connecting now to the human settlements and cities, we also need to realize, or clearly we realize, that many regions of the world still need infrastructure, whether it is to generate energy or to transmit electricity or to provide decent homes or linear infrastructure to circulate goods and produce food, and by the way, reduce food loss at source. All this is a fundamental role of infrastructure in building a better society, more equitable and more prosperous. But we also understand that we need to balance the relationship, if you like, between production and protection, between built infrastructure, the one that we create for our own needs, and the natural infrastructure that also we need in order to, as I mentioned earlier, in order to provide the goods and services that we all depend on. And so that balance is a critical balance that today we haven't got right, and we have to focus on in building the right necessary infrastructure in the forthcoming decades. The other point is that what happens in cities does not stay in the cities. As you know, as I mentioned before, cities are a major center of consumption, and are focusing particularly on consumption because this is where cities are today a major element of our footprint around the world. And if you like, they disconnect that in many cases exists between urban population and the rest of the world, and particularly where most of the goods are produced, is a cultural divide that also needs to be addressed. But other good news, we believe in WWF, is that not only we must, but actually we know that we can reverse climate change and nature loss. And we need to do that in the next 10 to 20 years. And this is where cities come in as solution, not just as problems, particularly if you focus on the production and consumption changes, shifts, deep systemic changes that we need to bring about, particularly the way we produce and consume energy, particularly the way we produce and consume food, both on land, agriculture, and in the ocean through fishing. And of course, all this can only be driven if we redirect financial flows in the right direction. And this is about both cutting the harmful subsidies that today are still promoting the old style economy, and redirect those subsidies and turn it into incentives for actually the green shift we need to see. We also know that nature in cities is extremely beneficial, and it's not that difficult to obtain. There are great examples around the world of cities that has transformed themselves relatively quickly, bringing nature in and benefiting not only the mental health and the quality of life of the citizens, but also mitigating and adapting, if you like, to some of the most pressing issues of cities, from pollution to rising temperatures. But I mentioned risks and costs of nature loss and climate change. Well, there is also a massive economic opportunity attached to climate stabilization and nature conservation. There is a recent study report from the World Economic Forum called The Future of Business as Nature. Actually, it is looking at a number of nature positive transitions around key sectors in our economy: food, on land and the ocean, infrastructure, in fact, and built environment, energy extractives, forestry. And there is an opportunity, there is a potential of generating $10 trillion and 400 million new jobs related to a shift to green economy in the next 10 years by the end of this decade. So a massive opportunity that the COVID crisis and the need to invest in recovery from the COVID crisis give us the opportunity to really now direct much more quickly than ever thought before financial flows in sustainable direction. And let me finish with what Professor John Mansell mentioned at the end of his speech. Next year is going to be a critical year. We should have been this year, to be honest, but because of COVID, is now 2021. This is a year that could be really referred to as a super year for sustainability. It is a year where the world will come together under the framework of the SDGs, looking at big challenges like climate change and nature loss, and in an integrated way. That's our opportunity to build a holistic vision, a holistic plan that brings together climate, nature, ocean, food production, sustainability, and commit governments and business, and frankly, all of us consumers, to a common vision, a vision that cannot be other than a carbon neutral and a nature positive vision for our economy. Carbon neutral by 2050, this is a very clear, clearly stated by science, and now science is very clear that by 2030, we need to halt and stop losing nature and start a process of recovery. That's fundamental to avoid the tipping points I mentioned earlier. This is exciting, this is challenging, this is imperative, and this will give us the, if you like, double North Star or Southern Cross for our society that we should all follow and contribute towards. That needs to be translated into a plan with targets, time-bound, with indicators, and particularly needs to be matched by strong vision and strong leadership, both at government, business, but also civil society level. So it's with a word of concern, but also excitement, that we are looking to next year as a pivotal year to really begin to build a sustainable, equitable, and safer future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marco. I should confess that I found you a little bit, I would say, too optimistic from what I know from WWF. And it's surprising for me. You said yourself we achieved a lot, but I believe that we can destroy it all overnight, and we have proved our level of irresponsibility. We are beginning to understand, which a little bit is too late, because the level of destruction is so high that just beginning to understand seems to be far too slow. And I like at the end, we must and we can. And you refer to our consumption and production patterns and so on. And I took a figure, if I recall well, from WWF a few years ago, which is the 2 to 3 billion additional middle class consumers that if they continue business as usual, we will have no resources and we will destroy everything. And we're just heading to that. We're not reversing it. So what makes you so optimistic today with the leaders we have, with the consumption patterns we have, with the level of distraction we have, while we have only very few and limited good practices that are not scaled up at all?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I think it is an optimism that I hope it is based on a ground of realism for two reasons. The first reason, and let me, I made clear that we are facing a big challenge, right? So I don't underestimate the challenges of today, and clearly all the indicators that I didn't mention because we mentioned before are clearly saying that we are heading in the wrong direction. We're heading towards ecosystem collapse. So there is no room for complacency. But on one hand, what really makes me excited, I mean, I was a member of WWF when I was 12, and then I moved along, but I've been in conservation of nature since I was a baby, almost. So I have to say, sometimes I ask myself, why I'm so excited about this time compared vis-a-vis the big challenges and the data, the figures that show that we're going in that direction. Two reasons, I would say. First of all, because I think we as humans, we are pretty good at solving single problems, but very bad at taking a long-term and holistic perspective. And in order to do that, we need to really face the problem. We are very bad at foreseeing issues. We had so many examples in the past, but when a problem is into our face, we are beginning to take action. And there are some good examples of that happening in the past. I mean, probably the most extraordinary one is when we pull our act together around the ozone layers in the late 90s. But so I believe that now we are at that point. Climate change and nature loss increasingly are both showing impact on our lives every day, and impact on our wallet, tragic loss of lives, reduction of our quality of life. So all that definitely is going to be representing a watershed moment for us. We are beginning to react, and that's the second reason for being optimistic. We are seeing that these issues now are at the top of the political agenda. We've been shouting for decades and nobody was listening because the crisis wasn't there. Now that the crisis is visible and tangible and economically quantifiable, leaders and business are listening. And I am encouraged by all this science. Not that we should be complacent, don't get me wrong. And the challenge is big and we need the big changes I mentioned. But we understand the problem. When you have to solve the problem, you have to understand the problem. And when you want to transition somewhere else, you need to understand the end state of the transition. We are clear now on both. Now the focus needs to be on the pathway to get to the one we want to be. And the pathway is what exactly we discussed and many of other speakers mentioned today. Reform the production consumption system.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco. I hope you can transmit a little bit of your optimism to me, because I'm getting every day much more pessimistic, mainly when you refer to the leaders. And my optimism is only on the individuals, the consumers, and the small communities, definitely not on the big companies, definitely not on the government. But this is my perspective. Thank you very much, Marco. I hope to meet you again soon. Let us move to the next speaker, Professor Shen Jinghuang, Distinguished Professor of Fudan University, member of China National Committee for International Union of Biological Sciences, and Director of Shanghai Ecological Conservation Red Line Expert Committee. Professor Shen, please, the floor is yours. 主席先生，
我非常高兴有这次发言的机会。这次新冠病毒 给了我2个重大启示，一个是人与自然的冲突已经集中到城里来了。这次新冠病毒的大爆发地区，在中国是武汉，在西方欧美国家都是大城市。但是启示是不同的城市爆发的程度是不一样的。 我们刚才很多专家都讲到全球的问题，但是这地球表面各个城市的生态环境是不一样的，所以这一次的新冠病毒当中，这应对的这个状态也是不一样的。下面呢，我就以上海为例，看上海它的生态建设对它持续发展的重要影响。 这个报告是由我跟我的研究生一起做的，它的题目是《上海自然禀赋与生态制成的建设之路》。那么这个报告，我是复旦大学的特聘教授，专门研究生态学的。 我的学生李清博士是专门研究政策的、发展战略的。我们来看看上海有哪些自然禀赋呢？这张图大家看，上海的位置在世界上6大城市群中间，它的地理位置得天独厚。它一边是靠着西太平洋的终点，一边是靠着长江口。上海是长江口和 海洋带结合部，这是世界上所有的特大城市所独一无二的，特别是有一个河流大河流作为背景。第二个，这张图大家看到，因为上海是长江三角洲地区，它的历史上，在它左边那个图，62%以上的土地都是长江的泥沙堆积而成的。到1949年。 我们还有1000多平方公里，让上海的国土面积扩大了15%，所以上海是世界上特大城市不断在扩张面积的一个城市。但是由于上游、中上游的水利工程建设，雷沙减少，上海这个全球气候变暖、海平面升高，它也将面临的威胁。 那么第3个特点，上海地处中亚热带季风气候，它的光照非常的充足，它的光的时空配置非常适宜，它的温度是季风气候，四季分明，雨量充沛，雨热同季。下面这个数据非常说明问题，上海可以持续发展有一个重要的原因，当地的水资源每年的水资源量 只有537亿吨，但是长江的干流的过境水高达每年9730亿吨。那么这个长江的过境水为上海的水资源提供了一个强大的支撑。 另外一个，我们来看长江这个我们的上海境内6340平方公里上，上海有2万多条河流，有692个湖泊，有4个水库，而其长江口的滩涂湿地还有2900多平方公里，所以上海的生态要素配置非常的合适，它的资源非常丰富。第三个，我们这个主题要讲生物多样性的可持续的管理。你看，上海往往容易误解，上海是一个特大城市，但是上海的区域6350平方公里，实际上它是国际重要的生态敏感区，因为长江的河口就在上海的境内，它的生物多样性非常的高。这个它表现在生物多样性高，一般人都无法思议，一个特大城市居然生物多样性那么高，因为它的生态系统很复杂，它有陆地的城市、旱地、草地、森林、岛屿；湿地它又有滩涂、河流、湖泊、池塘、水田；海洋它有河口湾，有近海海岸。这个它的生物多样性非常的独特。你们看，我们国家的领导人到上海去，是很多人都会去看崇明东滩，因为它是世界上生态敏感区。下面2张鸟都是世界上著名的一个黑绿琵鹭和一个鹤类，这是国际上重要的鸟类。这是我们2个人的2篇文章，一篇在《文汇报》上专门采访我，这个标题非常引人关注。上海是全球生物多样性保护的关键地区。这篇文章采访，我用证据来证明上海对全球生物多样保护的重要。右边一篇文章是专门就是清理了一下上海的生态学的家底，就是它的水、气、土、生各方面，上海的优点和弱点。那么我们第2个问题，上海已经早就制定了一个战略目标，要建设生态之城。那我们来看看上海的生态之城的建设目标和挑战是什么。我们的上海的生态之城建设要面对3个生态系统，一个自然的生态系统，比如说滩涂、河流、湖泊，我们要求这些自然生态系统要健康。我们有建成区，有城乡结合部，有美丽乡村，这种人居生态系统，我们要求人与自然和谐。我们有第2产业、第3产业，我们要求产业是绿色、低碳、循环，它是要创新，它是一个高端的产业生态系统。那么，我想。这个今天我听了2位专家，一个专家呢是 WWF 的专家呢比较乐观，但是我们的主持人呢比较悲观。我想悲观和乐观这2个方面取决于我们人类对人与自然冲突的处理方式。我以上海为例，上海30年来有很多重要的生态文明建设的案例，反映了中国的智慧和中国的方案。我们看右边的红颜色，表示我们生态治理的一些方案。我们有环境治理、自然保护、生态修复、绿色发展、生态宜居、循环利用。我印象最深刻的，因为我是从小在上海长大的，亲眼目睹了苏州河从一条河流到污染极其严重的一条死河。但这20-30年来，上海的苏州河的整治，以及上海的2万多条河道整治，发生了翻天覆地的变化，这充分反映了中国政府的决心。另外一个，长江口的自然保护地建设，这个非常的完整。这30年来，有鸟类保护区、鱼类保护区、湿地保护区和岛屿保护区。第3个成绩，应该我深以为自豪的，这外来种入侵现在是一个非常严重的问题。 在崇明东滩，我们有北美引入的护花迷草，但是我们控制的非常好，一共22平方公里，这个我们把它控制好，而且把鸟类的栖息地重新修复。这个工程受到了联合国环境开发署的高度的评价。崇明世界级生态岛建设被联合国环境开发署评价为是世界上30多个岛国的一个范例，是引领了世界30个岛屿这个岛国的生态文明建设。那么其他的我不再多说，但是我们的不能乐观，所以说我们乐观的是因为前面我们取得了重要的成绩，我们可以有所作为的。但是我并不乐观，现在我们的压力非常大。我们来看上海面临什么压力？内部的压力。我们的上海只有6350平方公里，它的国土面积是有限的。但是我们看最近的内部压力，我们要放开户籍制度，留学生大规模的回国到上海定居，外籍人员在上海定居，低端的劳动力涌入，放开二胎政策，上海的人口从解放初期大概700万人口，到现在的2400万人口，已经增长了这个200%多。那么现在的上海的人口的增长速率还可能增加，但是人口的增加一方面，另外人均的资源量需求也不断的增加，包括住房、车位、道路等等要求也是增加，所以上海的这个内部的压力也非常的大。但是我这里特别是我经过长期对长江流域的大保护的现场考察，上海面临了巨大的外部的压力，比如说长江流域的生态环境的变迁，全流域的影响，长江的上中游的大型水利工程建设将改变长江的泥沙和水量的通量，南水北调、鄱阳湖水利工程建设、长江中部城市群建设、长江的航运建设都将对上海造成了巨大压力。长江三角洲的经济区，就长江三角洲城市群的建设，会导致沿江不止污染企业，城市化进一步的加剧，交通压力加大。至于说全球气候变化对上海这个海洋性城市影响非常的大。右下角一个图就预测在全球气候变暖什么情况下，上海将要淹没到海洋中间去。这个第三个，这个今天我听的报告绝大多数都是这个国际组织领袖或者政府的官员，这个我在这里非常特殊啊。复旦大学有一批科学家，我举例子，科学家在这个城市可持续发展和生物多样性保护中起到巨大作用。我在这里借机会要呼吁，请各位要高度重视科学家的作用，科学家讲出重要的智慧。这个你们看中间的一个文是我起草的，给国家的建议一个内参，右边是科学考察的一个报告。所以长江口借了保护区体系，科学家起了重要的作用。这张图是长江三角洲的泥沙的变迁，我们承担了这个上海市科委的项目，向政府预告上海的这个长江三角洲的河口将来土地会发生一些重大变化，而且给上海市政府提出了土地的这规划的决策，得到了政府的充分肯定。第三个，这个案例就是对外来物种护花迷草的生态工程，这个工程由我们跟当地的政府跟国家林业局提出来的。这个工程一共是11个亿，这个11亿的工程已经完成了，被世界上认为是最大的护花迷草的生态工程。这应该是这个科学家和政府的合作，利益相关方的合作的结果。 那么我想最后我们想对这个上海的生态文明建设一些战略思考，而且对全世界的其他城市可以供参考的。我们建议就是上海必须要优化国土空间开发格局，具体做法一定要留作生态空间。我们不能把我们的国土上海的6350平方公里都用完，比如崇明岛就是一个战略空间预留的。第二个，一定要对盘活的土地存量，现在在开发商里的土地要盘活存量，而且对长江口的这出淤在横沙岛和九段沙还要进一步出淤扩大我们的面积。另外一个，我们全面促进资源节约，改变对土地财政的依赖，遏制利用土地的奢靡之风，推动居民的消费革命。另外一个，我们建议第三个建议加大生态和环境保护力度。上海的这河流还有待于一系列的重大的修复工程，而且要解决损害这个群众的健康的一些问题啊，比如自来水，上海的自来水质量现在还跟国际上很多城市不能比，要改成直饮水。上海的城区的空气质量要有待于进一步提高。上海的老百姓的食品安全要得到确切的保证，而且我们建议要加强生态文明制度建设，特别是长三角一体化，生态保护要联动，而且要进行审计和问责制，以及包括预警等。那么我非常感谢这个大会对我的邀请，我的结束语是这样的，希望能够对这次会议上有一定的借鉴作用。我个人认为，生态兴则城市兴，生态衰则城市衰。所以我们的城市的出路在于要生态文明建设。而且我今天非常欣赏今天主持报告的主题，保护和可持续管理生物多样性，才能保障上海的生态安全。所以我们在讲上海，我一直在主张讲上海一定要讲上海的生物多样性，讲中国的城市一定要讲我们的自然特征和自然的资本，特别是要讲生物多样性。我们的城市离开生物多样性的保护和可持续管理，我们就没有根基。所以我既是乐观的，也是谨慎乐观的。人类总有我们的智慧去应对我们面临的困难。好，谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Professor Shen Jiankang. I understand from you that before we get to the ecological civilization in Shanghai, there is still a lot to do, which is normal. And I hope that people can learn from the experience of Shanghai and from your large knowledge. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. We are running out of the time. And I will move to the next one. I'm sorry if I cannot go on Q&A. Can I ask now Professor Dr. Joseph Setele, the research scientist, Department of Community Ecology, MSALT, Center for Environmental Research, UFZ, to come in, please. Can you, the floor is yours, Professor Joseph Setele. Do we have Dr. Jet Setele online?
Today. My name is Josef Setele, and I'm co-chair of the Global Assessment of IPBES.
Okay, the floor is yours, sir.
In the Government Science Policy
We don't hear you.
Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. I want to summarize today the main results of our assessment and also present some insights into the link between biodiversity and the recent pandemics. First of all, the global assessment. This was done in the last 3 years with a team of 500 people, led by 3 colleagues, myself and 2 friends of mine from North America and Argentina. We had some very important findings, summarized as follows. The biosphere and the atmosphere upon which humanity as a whole depends have been deeply reconfigured by people. 3/4 of the land area is very significantly altered. 2/3 of the ocean area is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts, and more than 85% of wetlands on a global scale have been lost. We also could find out that the global extinction rate for species is at least tens to hundreds of times higher than it has been on average over the last 110 million years. And by and large, we can assume that in the next decades, we might lose 1 million species if we really do not counteract. Also on the negative side, we looked on the nature's contributions to people, often known as ecosystem services. We had 18 different categories, and most of them showed a negative trend in the last 50 years. For example, the habitat creation, habitat maintenance went down quite a lot, pollination was decreasing, but also regulation of air quality. We had some increases, for example, in energy, this biomass production, also in food in terms of carbohydrates, but 14 out of 18 of these services showed negative trends. We have dramatically reconfigured the fabric of life of the planet, and our world is becoming much more interconnected, yet increasingly unequal. What we also done was we looked at the direct drivers. This means that meeting global societal goals through urgent and concerted efforts addressing direct drivers of change have accelerated during the past 50 years to levels unprecedented in human history. We analyzed land use change, sea use change, direct exploitation, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. And it's in this sequence that have been most important in the last 50 years. So land use and sea use change is the most dominant one so far, and climate change is number 3, but with a trend of being increasingly important in the coming future. But besides the direct drivers, we looked at the indirect ones, which really are responsible for all the things which are happening on the globe. And very simplified, we can say we have to look at things like governance and economic systems and equity, cross-sectoral planning, incentives, and social narratives and values. All of them have a heavy impact on the direct drivers like climate change and land use change. And if we want to achieve our joint visions we have on the globe in terms of biodiversity conservation and maintaining ecosystems, we have to move in a direction which we call a transformative change, which requires changes in production and consumption of energy and food, which requires low to moderate population growth, and nature-friendly and socially fair climate adaptation and mitigation. This transformative change is defined as a fundamental system-wide reorganization of technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, targets, and values. Challenges related to climate change, nature deterioration, and achieving a good quality of life for all are really interconnected. Therefore, they need to be addressed synergistically from local to global levels. And the key constituent of sustainable pathways is the evolution of global financial and economic systems to build a global sustainable economy, one that steers away from the current limited paradigm of economic growth. These are some of the key statements of the assessment, and related to the last one, I want to just make a few words on the pandemic. So COVID-19 and biodiversity and the linkage between them. We made a statement on the US homepage on this in a team of 4 people. First of all, it's important to know that pandemics can develop if there is a lot of contact between people and animals and wildlife. That's quite an important precondition. Now, in recent times, we had we created a perfect storm, which means we created conditions for these pandemics to happen. We had a kind of, let's say, a kind of intensive loss of forest, with extension of agriculture, intensive land use in terms of animal breeding. We have mining, and we have infrastructure developments. We have exploitation of wild species, and we have an unregulated trade of wild animals, and an explosion kind of increase of the global travel. So these are all kind of conditions which really, let's say, promote the pandemics. And we have to be careful that now the measures we take to, let's say, look at the effects of the pandemic doesn't create new risks for new pandemics in the future. And there are 3 important components for this billion kind of programs for our economy. And the one is about environmental standards which have to be kept. You have to follow One Health approach, which means you have to let's look at the health of animals, of people, of course, and health of ecosystems in combination. And you have to look at the health systems. So, but by and large, it's important to really prevent the destruction of nature and to reduce the direct interaction of big numbers of animals with big numbers of people. As a conclusion from this and the global assessment, we can say that the loss of species, degradation of ecosystems, and loss of ecosystem services, and the business as usual is clearly unsustainable. This also is a call for action for transformational change, which means to tackle the direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, to address climate change and loss of biodiversity together, to scale successful policies and projects, to coordinate and integrate cross-sectoral actions, and to evolve economic and financial systems. We have to ensure inclusive governance structures, which includes governments, private sector, civil society, and local communities. I hope this gave a short overview, and I hope you have a successful meeting. Thanks for your attention, and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Setele. Thank you for this, those key elements of the global assessment you have made, and I hope that the different stakeholders will carefully take into consideration the outcome and recommendation of this report. Since we're short of time, I regret not be able to ask you a question. Let us move now to the last speaker of this keynote speech session, Professor Undun Wong, the permanent representative of Vanuatu to UNESCAP, chairman of the Global One Belt, One Road Association. Professor Wong.
可以了。
大会主席、同志们、先生们，大家早上好、中午好、晚上好。在这个多事之秋的庚子年，第15届全球人居环境论坛年会，终于以云端会议的方式，今天顺利的召开了。这马上就进入冬天，同时我们也知道春天也即将到来。明年的金秋时节，当我们再度重逢在第16届全球人居环境论坛年会的时候，那么第15届全球人居环境论坛年会的点点滴滴便变成我们美好的会议。诸位，2018年10月30号，第13届全球人居环境论坛年会在泰国曼谷联合国亚太经社理事会的总部召开。我当时发表演讲的题目是人居环境是一个天下存亡的课题。2019年9月5号，在联合国非洲经济委员会埃塞俄比亚首都亚的斯亚贝巴总部召开。我的演讲题目是忽视人居环境，人类将是人类的掘墓人。今年呢，我们这次的主旨演讲的主题是保护生物多样性，保障生态安全。我想对这么一个非常专业的问题，让我们的专家学者去讲。我诚心呢跑个题发表点有关健康安全问题在人居环境的 地位中的地位。故今天我的演讲题目是健康与安全是人居环境的第一要素和核心指标。众所周知，人居环境是一个总概念，包含了油盐柴米酱醋茶的生活环境，生存和贡献社会的工作环境，但它更需要包含健康环境、安全环境。由于人类自身的信仰问题、价值观念问题、道德问题，致使我们生存的环境地球早已无力承受人类物欲之中空气污染、水污染、地球暖化、海洋酸化、陆地荒漠化、城市垃圾化等等等等。地球早已经是千疮百孔。有关这方面的问题，我在2018年、2019年2届论坛上做过演讲，这里不再去罗列更多的数字。2020年，中国60甲子的庚子年，有好事之人做了一个统计，自公元前220年前起，到现在每一个庚子年对人类大家庭来说都是叫流年不利，或曰庚子之坎，或曰庚子之劫。如果是个坎儿，咱们小心翼翼一点就能翻过；如果是个劫，那就叫在劫难逃。接下来我想谈的第一个问题是新冠与我们的健康环境。4月全球208个国家和地区的新冠，是对我们人类人居环境中的健康环境的一次超强度的警示。种什么因，得什么果。历史的共业让人类的每一份子都成不了一座孤岛。3000多万人感染，意味着3000万个家庭的破碎，75亿地球人心里经受着煎熬，全球买单，世界停摆。据梅肯锡全球研究院8月初发布的全球价值链中的风险恢复力和再平衡报告研究指出，疫情对全球经济损害至少在30万亿美金以上，远比假设的2次世界大战的损失还严重。我们知道2战的范围从欧洲到亚洲，从大西洋到太平洋，先后有61个国家和地区，20亿以上的人口被卷入，直接的经济损失5万亿美金以上。那么新冠呢？损失是30万亿美金以上，是2战的6倍。30万亿美金的概念是什么呢？2019年 全球200多个国家或地区 GDP 的总量是87.7万亿美元，减去30万亿美元，那就剩下57亿多美元，57.5亿美元等同于2007年全球 GDP 的总量。也就是说，这一场新冠让全球的经济倒退了13年。10月7号，世界银行发布统计预测，到2021年底，也就是明年底，全球将有1.5亿人口陷入极端贫困。自今年8月以来，联合国及其下属机构世界粮农组织多次拉响世界粮荒警报。因为疫情，全球的粮食生产减产欠收，今年将新增1.3亿名饥饿人口，全世界将有6.9亿人处于饥饿状态，全球75亿人，每30个人中可能有1人因为饥饿而度过不了2020年。诸位，我的结论是，健康环境它会直接影响到人类的生存环境。第二点，新冷战与我们的安全环境。庚子年真的多事，无独有偶，全球化面临了严峻的挑战和考验。单边主义抬头，新冷战、新对抗、东西方撕裂、局部战争，甚至世界性的战争阴影，又重新回到了人类的日常生活。一场新冠已经压得人类难以喘息，若再发生局部或世界性的战争，它将成为压垮人类的最后一根稻草。基于大家知道的原因，也基于时间原因，我在此对这一问题不做更多的阐述。总而言之，人居环境不仅仅是绿水青山和月圆花好，它的第一要素和核心指标应该是事关人类生存的健康环境与安全环境。因此，切莫要以为疫情、新冷战、新对抗，甚至战争与你无关，与你家人无关，与你的单位无关，与你的村、你的街道无关，与你生活的县市省甚至国家无关。其实他们无时不与你相关，无时不与你相连。正所谓，历史的车轮站出一地围城，落在了个人的身上，它便是一座喜马拉雅山。因此，维护我们的人居环境，必须维护我们的健康环境、安全环境。怎么维护？ 2句话，3个字：爱与自律。最后，我谨以全球人居环境论坛荣誉主席、世界“一带一路”主席、世界区块链联盟主席的身份，祝福多灾多难的却有希望之河永存的地球，祝福劫难不断却有勇创辉煌文明的人类，也祝福参加第15届全球人居环境论坛的各位朋友，挥别阴影，告别悲情，怀揣希望，拥抱明天。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Professor Wong, and we hope that all your best wishes will come through for all of us for a healthy planet and healthy society. The session has taken much longer than expected. I'm sorry for that, and I will conclude with this, the keynote speech session, and I will pass back the floor to our colleague from DFS, Christine, Suzanne, whoever takes back.
Thank you. Thank you, Arab. Ladies and gentlemen, here comes to the end of the keynote session. Huge thanks go to our moderator, Mr. Arab Habla, and our distinguished keynote speakers for sharing their insights and brilliant ideas. Now we